We're learning Torah today for the sake of our brethren in Eretz Yisrael. That's also how we strengthen the people of Israel. So we're on page. We're going to start again on the bottom of page 89. Okay, bottom of page 89 in the Kuzari, and this is section, paragraph 77, part 2. Now, where we left off, last 2 weeks ago, when we last studied this text, is that we were talking about Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's depiction of what he calls nature, or what philosophers call nature, which is basically God embedded in a system of how the world works, but don't think that God put the world on autopilot. When we talk about nature, all it means is that Hashem allows for a certain pattern of behavior that he is constantly in control of. God submits to, at his own will, to an order that happens on a daily basis. But God could, at any moment, change the order, and that would be called a miracle. But we should never misinterpret the regular pattern of the way the world runs as God simply winding up a clock and then going somewhere else. Hashem is constantly engaged and connected to our world, our physical world. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had left off this last discussion with something very cryptic. And he said, do not doubt, and this is the bottom 2 lines on page 89, do not doubt that there are divine influences that permeate the objects of this lowly world, provided that the objects are prepared to receive them. This idea is the root of faith and the root of heresy. Now, that doesn't seem, we really don't understand, at least at face value, what he's trying to say. He says that Hashem is connected to our world, and that Hashem connects to different physical things in our world to varying degrees, depending upon their ability or their receptivity to divine influence. What he seems to be saying is that different things in the world are either more or less receptive to Hashem's influence. Well, what does that really mean? At face value, it would mean as follows. It would mean that if you're a human being and you have consciousness and you have intelligence, then you're able to receive a greater degree of divine influence or sort of divine intervention in your life. An inanimate object also unquestionably receives divine influence because everything that exists in the physical world is constantly being controlled and maintained by Hashem. But the influence of Hashem is not as manifest in a rock, which the lifetime of a rock, it pretty much doesn't change at all. It gets wet once in a while, it gets warm once in a while, but that's about it, right? Whereas people or things that undergo many different kinds of changes, it's much more apparent that there's some kind of divine interaction or godly providence that watches over them and influences the way that they undergo these kinds of changes. So therefore, human beings are probably the most prone to these kinds of divine influences, and inanimate objects are the least prone, or at least have the least evidence of these divine influences. Now, also what he's alluding to, which is something that is going to be part of our next discussion, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created laws of nature that not only affect the physics of everything that exists, but also affect the metaphysics of everything that exists. You know, we've given this analogy before about the lulav and the esrog. A lulav and an esrog have more or are more connected to some kind of divine influence, meaning that when you shake the lulav and an esrog, you're doing something cosmic. You're creating some kind of difference in the very fabric of the spiritual fabric of our universe, which we don't see, but which we affirm and believe is taking place every time on Sukkot we shake that lulav in the esrog. So therefore, the esrog has more divine interaction, so to speak, than a lemon. That if I were to shake a lemon on Sukkot, the divine influence, or sort of the impact that the shaking of that lemon would have, would be insignificant compared to the impact that I would have on the cosmos, or the spiritual fabric of the world, by shaking the esrog together with the lulav. All right, so do we understand what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is trying to indicate to us? It's not that God is less connected or more connected to anything in the world. It's either a question of God's influence being manifest in more sophisticated creatures, or that God embedded within certain kinds of elements or constructs within this world the ability for those things and objects to be able to have more divine influence or to create a bigger difference in the world. So therefore, when a person does a certain kind of mitzvah, like offering a certain kind of korban according to the prescribed directions of how to offer that korban, then that person creates or triggers a divine response. If I were to take a chicken and build an altar in my backyard and offer that chicken as an offering up to God, that would pretty much have zero divine influence. I would not be entitled to expect God to answer my prayers because I slaughtered a chicken on an altar of my own design. But if I go to the Beis HaMikdash and I bring the prescribed sheep and I give it to the Kohen, then there's something metaphysical about that sheep that's brought into the temple in Jerusalem, offered by the Kohen according to the prescribed methods, using the right amount of blood to sprinkle on the altar, using the proper amount of wine libation that is poured concomitantly with the burning of the different animal parts, and using the flour offering, and doing everything according to the prescribed method, such that the flour and the oil and the sheep meat all combine together in some kind of metaphysical way that is invisible to all of us, but because I've conformed to certain prescribed methods that the Torah says work, I have created or caused God, or triggered some kind of divine response from Hashem that will manifest itself in one way or another. Now, this idea of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, he says, is the root of faith and the root of heresy. And that certainly has to be explained. What do you think he means? Does anyone have any idea? What do you think he's touching upon when he says it's both the root of faith and the root of heresy, that depending upon the object and the place and the time that we do the mitzvah, that we will trigger, sometimes we will trigger divine influence and sometimes we won't. How could that be the root of faith and the root of heresy at the same time? Yes, Miriam, go ahead.
The first thought that I would come up with is it would be fate if we're sort of in line with Hashem's will and doing it not for the purpose of the outcome, but could it be heresy if we are trying to control and doing it only so that we would have the outcome?
Okay, so you're suggesting that it depends on our motive or our kavanah when we're doing the mitzvah. If we do it purely to be able to get some kind of benefit from Hashem, that might be somewhat heretical. And I might be inclined to agree with you. However, bear in mind that the Talmud does say that if a person takes a coin and as he's putting it in the pushka, he or she says, Sel azu litzdaka al menat sheyichya b'ni, that I hereby give this coin to tzedakah only on the condition that my child should be cured, Tzaddik Gamurhu, this person is a complete tzaddik. In other words, while it's true that the higher form of serving Hashem is shelo al manat lekabel pras, is without the hope of receiving a reward, but even when you serve Hashem with some ulterior selfish motive to be able to gain something, you're still serving Hashem. So I don't think that that's really what he's getting to in this particular paragraph. Yes?
So, if you're one way of saying the Emunah Pshuta is believing that whatever Hashem says, that's the prescription, and you do it, and without questioning. So that's good, complete faith. The heresy is if you question it, you try to figure out why, and then you say, that's the reason, and then you try to say, since I know the reason, I can figure out another way to get around the reason.
Excellent. Very nice. Very good. What did you want to say?
So I was thinking a little bit differently, because the point that you brought out was if you take two types of korbanos, and one is done in the way that the Rabbi Shalom wants you to do it, and one is done the way you think you should be doing it. One is therefore serving Hashem, and one is not serving Hashem. So I think where the faith and heresy comes in is that if we we have difficulty in doing it the way Hashem wants us to do. That's the faith. In doing it just because that's what Hashem wants from us, and that's the way He wants us to do it, and therefore that's the faith. The other part is when we come in with our own chokhmah and say, no, I want to do it this way, so therefore...
Yeah, I think you're saying some very similar ideas. They sound very similar. They're both, and it's excellent. As we will see unfolding in this discussion, Rabbi Yehuda Levi is going to point out to us is that a common mistake that people make is that, well, if I know that God doesn't, if I affirm and believe that God does interact with our world, then maybe I can innovate my own interpretations of how to bring down divine influence, right? And as we're going to see, this is precisely how we're going to get into a discussion of the golden calf. One of the things that Rabbi Yehuda Levi discusses extensively in the first essay of the Kuzari, a little bit later on, is a discussion of the Egel HaZahav, a discussion of the golden calf. For Rabbi Yehuda Levi, the mistake or the error of the golden calf was not that the Jewish people rejected Hashem, but rather they took it upon themselves to innovate a form of divine service that had never been commanded by Hashem. Listen, I believe in God. I believe that God interacts with our universe and that we have an ability to trigger divine response. But why is it necessary for me to go according to the very limited prescriptions of the Torah? Why can't I know what the physical universe is about? I have a sense of spirituality within the world. Why can't I create my own methods and techniques of triggering divine service that I feel are meaningful to me? And that's the mistake, says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, because a mitzvah is not just a feel-good experience. A mitzvah, there's a certain kind of invisible frequency that within everything that exists within the universe. And if you try to tamper with that invisible frequency by changing even one slight iota, you're going to end up with a terrible disaster. Not only will it not end up bringing you what your objective was in the first place, because you won't succeed in triggering that divine response, but it'll end up as the source of heresy, as he's going to say, because you're going to really end up denying the whole construct of this universe, that God has a certain divine plan that goes well beyond the human intellect. Now, of course, we see this all the time in the modern world. We find Jews who feel that they can innovate new ideas and new techniques within Judaism. So therefore, if I decide that from this Shabbos, let's say, I get up and I say that instead of prayer, we're going to do interpretive dance from our chairs. And I'd like everyone to please come up in groups of 10 up to the bima and act out whatever they feel is meaningful to them in their service of Hashem. Wouldn't that be just a beautiful thing? Of course, this is what happens in California all the time. And of course, this is what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is railing against. He's railing against this kind of touchy, what we would call, the touchy-feely, kind of silliness that we see. Not to say that there's no significance to trying to create innovations, but they have to be innovations that are within the parameters of halakha. They have to be within the parameters of prayer or other mitzvah observance, such that I'm not completely departing from the prescribed mitzvahs of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. This, of course, we have to appreciate as we're going to get into this analysis of the analogy that Rabbi Yehuda Levi presents to us. We're going to see that this is not necessarily agreed to the way that he presents. The necessity for precision of mitzvahs is ontologically connected, is hardwired to the cosmic fabric of our universe, such that if I digress one iota, just like if I'm a chemist and I'm trying to create some kind of compound, and I leave out even sometimes 1 microgram of a particularly vital ingredient, I mess the whole recipe up. That's the same thing with mitzvahs. I don't think everyone necessarily subscribes to the way that Rabbi Yehuda Levi is describing this precision within mitzvahs, and we're going to get to that later on. But why don't we read now? Yes, Rena.
I was just thinking that even if you follow exactly, that it still leads to heresy, because if you forget God's part in the equation, that you start thinking that your actions, even if they're prescribed by Hashem, but you put more kind of value in the action that you're doing, then it becomes like you're the one who's making the effect and forgetting that God's the one.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful point as well. It's an excellent point. Is that a person could get so caught up in the cause and effect, sort of like it becomes like a magical incantation or a magical performance, right? That you do in order to be able to achieve some kind of divine effect, that you forget that it's God who's controlling the whole system. Now, I think that what you've just expressed is what the Rambam has a problem with in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's worldview. That when it becomes too magical and too automatic, this process of triggering a divine response by plugging in the exact coordinates of the mitzvah and then getting back the exact effect that you want, the Rambam frowns on this because he feels that there's not enough of an understanding of the entire system, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running this. But I'm not convinced that that's Rabbi Yehuda Levi's concern. Whether or not he means that could be the source of heresy, perhaps he does mean that, but let's see as we see unfolding. We need a reader for today, beginning of paragraph 78 on page 90. We need a volunteer. Go ahead, Sippy, just loud for the camera.
The Kuzari asks, how can this be the root of faith and the root of heresy at the same time? The rabbi said, but it is. Those things which create a favorable environment for divine influences are beyond man's comprehension, both qualitatively, i.e. what means ought to be used to draw down this influence, and quantitatively, i.e. in what measure should these means be applied. Even if a person were privy to this information, he would not know when to put these factors to use. Rather, these ingredients, how they are used, and what is needed along with them for them to work properly, all required detailed clarification from God, i.e. from the Torah. Whoever has acquired this knowledge and has followed the instructions down to the finest detail with a full heart, such an individual is called a believer and will be favored with divine influence. However, one who attempts to create an environment for divine influence by using research, logic, and extrapolation, or by using what is written in the astrology books regarding the harnessing of spiritual influences or the making of talismans, such a person is a heretic. Impelled by his own intellect, this person offers sacrifices and incense, but he really has no idea what he's doing. What, how much, where, when, with whom, and so on.
So basically, what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is saying is that if you presume that you can understand how to hotwire the universe to be able to bring down divine influence, that's what makes you a heretic, because you feel that you can control the forces of the universe just using your own research and figuring out like how to plug in. Maybe that's really what Rena was trying to suggest. That is the source of heresy, because you're sort of trying to bypass Hashem. But if you use Hashem's prescribed method and you acknowledge that there is only one way to achieve spiritual success by using the prescribed methods of the Torah, then you're acknowledging that it's God who's running the world and is telling you what to do, and that is the key to faith. That is the source of faith. Yeah. Okay, very good. So let's see the analogy, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more.
This person is comparable to a fool who comes across the medicine cabinet of a doctor who is famous for his ability to heal the sick. The doctor is not in, and many people have gathered in his office to receive medicine. The fool proceeds to dispense medication to the patients, without knowing what medicines are intended for what sicknesses and without knowing the proper dosages. As a result, he kills patients with the very same medicines that could have been used to heal them. If by chance one person is healed by a particular medicine, everyone else in line will clamor for that same medication, thinking that it will cure all their sicknesses. This will continue until by chance they find another medicine that heals them. What they do not realize is that the real remedy is the prescription of the wise doctor, who mixes the compounds and knows exactly what and how much to dispense to each patient. The doctor would also prescribe for the patient the right diet, exercise, sleeping habits, environment, marital conduct, and the like.
Yep. So that's, the Torah tells us that Ani Hashem Rofe'echa, that I am Hashem, your doctor. Hashem calls himself our doctor. And what does the Torah mean when it says that I am Hashem, your doctor? Just like a doctor knows your body, Hashem knows your body better than any doctor because Hashem created your body. And if Hashem created the entire physical reality, then He knows exactly what you need to interact with and what you need to do in life in order to be spiritually successful. Don't think that you can figure it out on your own, or you can do your own research and read the occult books and the talismans and all that other kind of stuff. It doesn't work that way. This is, of course, also where we get into a little bit of a touchy subject, because there are many within our own very religious tradition who believe in the use of talismans and the use of other kinds of means in order to garner divine favor. And some of that sometimes can border on this heresy that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is talking about. If Rachmana litzlan, someone's child is sick, then we certainly can't judge that individual and condemn or criticize that person for trying whatever they think will work under the sun. So they'll organize Tehillim and they'll daven and they'll call out to Hashem and of course go to the doctors at the same time. And if Rachmana litzlan, they feel that nothing is working, they may times go to a makubal, and the makubal will do all of these kinds of incantations and drawings and palm reading and red threads and all of these other kinds of things. But we have to be very careful about this. And at some point it becomes heresy. At some point it becomes heresy when you start to believe in the remedy and stop thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you feel that I need to do all of these different kinds of Kabbalistic kinds of things in order to be able to garner divine influence, then, and that becomes your primary focus, and then it becomes heresy. And of course it's a very fine line. You know, I remember when one of our children became ill a few years ago, obviously everyone wants to help, you know, so I had one fellow called me up and told me, the reason why your son got sick is because there's a demon trapped in your house. Because in case you were living in a house where construction was done, it's brought down in Sefer Hasidim that if there was ever a window that was sealed in your house and it was sealed over, then the demons, the shadim that travel in and out of the windows got trapped, and that's why your child got sick. So of course, here I am sitting in the hospital room with my son, listening to this, and it takes every fiber of my being not to react violently. And I thanked him very much for his eitzah, because it really was coming from a good place. It was coming from a place of goodness. It was coming from a place of concern. It was coming from a place of a desire to help. But it was very much not appreciated because I just felt that we have to reach out to Hashem in the most direct of ways when we're hit with times of trouble, and not to try to find a way to hotwire our way to salvation. Am I making sense? Does this resonate with you?
But I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that?
No,
okay.
no.
Go ahead.
I mean, you know, if you're going through conventional medicine, like say somebody's got cancer, and they're giving you the worst prognosis, and then you go somewhere where they're trying some new technology that's maybe more natural. I mean, you know, that begs the question: should we believe everything that modern medicine tells us?
We're talking about two different things, you and I. You and I are addressing two different issues.
But number one, do we believe in shading today?
There's definitely sure it's not well. Shadim either exist or they don't exist. According to Chazal, shadim exist. To what extent?
From the rabbis, we don't believe in shading today.
As I said, shadim either exist or they don't exist. According to the rabbis of the Talmud, there is such a thing as shadim. When we say that we don't believe in them, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. It means that their influence upon humankind is extremely limited in today's world. But if you look at the mystical writings of even contemporary authors, you will find that Shadim is a concern, just as it is a concern to the Shulchan Aruch. Now, to your issue, as far as seeking out unconventional means when conventional means don't work, you and I agree. We completely agree. You have to try whatever you can. But at some point, you have to realize that if you're trying a supernatural method, then, and you make that your primary focus or your focus before or as the first line of defense, and perhaps even if it's the second or third line of defense, there does come a point where you're trying to tap into some kind of method of garnering divine influence without going directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, without going to Hashem. And it's a very difficult topic because I think that I don't think that we can be completely dismissive of the issue of the sealed-off window in your house, because it's brought in Sefer Hasidim that if you have sealed off a window in your home, you have to drill a hole to allow the shadim to escape. So I'm not poo-pooing it completely. I'm just saying that for the person to suggest that that's why maybe one of the reasons, or could be the reason why my child got sick, I don't think that that's a correct way of thinking. I just don't think so. Yes.
You know, somebody who lost a child and they're going to speak to somebody to be in touch with their child. Is that?
That's clearly forbidden by the Torah.
Yeah.
It couldn't be more clear. Necromancy, or the act of summoning the dead to communicate with them, is what the Torah calls the Doresh El Hametim, to seek out the dead.
So seeing the Mikubal is accepted?
Well, that's my point, is that there comes a point when seeking out a Mikubal, in my opinion, becomes theologically problematic. I didn't say that it's forbidden. I didn't say that you're a heretic if you do so. I simply said that I believe that it becomes theologically problematic depending upon the approach that you take. I've gone to see a Makubal before. I confess. I'm not a complete rationalist. I think that there are things in this universe that operate at a completely metaphysical frequency that are beyond my understanding, and I'm not, like a friend of mine once told me, never make fun of someone who can turn you into a frog. There are certain things in the world that are well beyond us, and I'm not here to completely ridicule them. But at the same time, we have to realize is that if we're placing our trust in the Mekubal before we place our trust in the Almighty, then that's theologically problematic. Yeah.
So, if I'm trying to frame this, is it more acceptable mainstream to say that you can be open to having the influence of these things, but they just shouldn't be at the top of the pyramid, and then ultimately you have to realize that Hashem controls everything, and that we do our hishtadlut and that we do our best, and then ultimately, because I came to mind, like there was a situation one in a camp where a lot of kids were getting hurt in a cabin, and checked the mezuzah, and there was an issue with the mezuzah. So how does that type of thing come into play with what you're saying?
No, I think that is an excellent way of couching the discussion. Is that, what's at the top of the pyramid and what's at the bottom of the pyramid. I believe I checked my mezuzahs as soon as our son got sick. That was one of the first things that we did. But it was clear to me that this could have been the straw that broke the camel's back, not the major part of the weight that created the burden in the first place. Yeah? Okay.
How is your son now?
Thank God. That's another discussion. Thank you. Baruch Hashem. Okay. No. Let's continue along. You can speak to me later. Okay. But anyway, now the other discussion that we need to have is we won't have time to discuss the Rambam today. We'll do that next week. But Sippy, please read until paragraph 80, if you don't mind.
This is how people were before the advent of Moshe. With the exception of a few individuals, people were seduced by belief in the power of the stars and other natural forces. They wandered from religion to religion, from God to God, some even adhering to several gods. Eventually they forgot the one who conducts and manages these forces and who placed them in the universe to benefit mankind. Instead, these forces became a source of harm to man because of man's inadequate preparation to receive influence and an improper use of them. Ultimately, then, the only truly beneficial tool is the divine Torah, and the lack thereof causes harm.
So you see, if you look carefully at his wording, he's not saying that talismans don't help. He's saying that eventually these forces became a source of harm to man because of man's inadequate preparation to receive influence. You have to be spiritually attuned to certain supernatural phenomena before you can, like the Gemara says, that it is dangerous to utilize the scepter of the king if you're a commoner. And so if a person were to be able to tap into some supernatural force that he has researched that exists, but it involves utilizing the names of angels, which was a common practice in earlier centuries, where a person would summon using different configurations of different angelic names in order to bring down divine influence upon oneself. But that person in their personal life, in the way that they lived their life, was not pious and did not live a life of asceticism and separateness, and did not regularly immerse in the mikveh, and did not focus all of their attention on that which is otherworldly. So then they could actually do damage by utilizing something extremely holy when they themselves are in a very unholy state. And that actually brings spiritual damage to the individual, because you're reaching too far when you're not ready for it. And therefore, the Ramchal, especially in Derech Hashem, talks about this being one of the dangers of utilizing supernatural forces when you're not ready to use them. So and therefore he says, ultimately then, the only truly beneficial tool is the tool of the Torah, which gives us prescribed methods that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this always works. When you shake that lulav and esrog on Sukkot, that's going to be the most beneficial way to bring rain. In addition to your tefillot, that's going to be the most beneficial way to bring rain during the rainy season for the land of Israel. When you eat matzah on Pesach, that'll be the way to have your soul become close to Hashem and feel a true sense of liberation. So therefore, trying to do that with rice matzah, even though you may feel, well, gluten-free is healthier or whatever it is, that's just not going to do it. Even if you may feel a sense on your own that there may be something better out there, or you may use some kind of incantation to get you there, but the mitzvahs that are prescribed in the Torah are the most effective method. So, yes, sure.
I don't mean to hurt, but I just want to ask you, if your child is sick and someone suggests you do a cheshbon hanefesh, what's your opinion on that? Because that makes you feel responsible almost. I have.
Yeah. So cheshbon hanefesh, what that person is suggesting is that you in some way are responsible for your child's illness. I think that's pretty insensitive. I even as your rabbi would never tell you to do that in a situation where you find yourself on the precipice of great tragedy in your life. It has to be, the Gemara does say, if a person finds himself being overrun by yisurim, by suffering, he says, yifashfesh b'ma'asav, that person should scrutinize their ways. However, at the end of the day, the Gemara says that even if you've been mefashfesh b'ma'asav, if you've scrutinized your ways and you haven't found anything, then there's so many other options as to why these things happen. There's only one out of numerous reasons that suffering comes to a person in their life is because of sin and a need for a cheshbon hanefesh. So it's sometimes people are too quick to say, oh, you must have done something wrong, which actually, of course, is the wrong thing to say to someone, because just as it is mitzvah to say that which will be heard is an equally mitzvah to not say that which cannot be heard. And when someone's child is sick and you tell them to a cheshbon hanefesh, that sounds to me like something that cannot very easily be heard, and it has to be approached properly. So, okay, so we'll hold it here. Kuzari.